Are there new people here this morning? Is there a couple? A few new? Okay. I'm actually going to do, I'm going to build on what we were looking at in the 2 sessions last night, but that will also involve a little bit of, looking at it from a different angle. So hopefully you'll catch up with the basic direction that I'm going. Okay, so, last night I was looking at basically the idea of the symptom, and the idea that whether individuals, family units, communities, political systems, economic systems have repressed things that are forgotten but not gone, things that cannot be spoken but that have an effect in those systems, often a destructive effect in those systems. And we looked at how the bringing to the surface of the repressed is itself productive. So, for example, all ideological systems have an acceptable and an unacceptable, but they also have an acceptably unacceptable dimension. That's the stuff that you can do as long as you don't really talk about it. So a relationship, you might have, you're not supposed to have an affair or an emotional affair even, or you're not supposed to have bitterness and anger. But as long as nobody talks about them, you're able to do those things discreetly. You're allowed to have bitterness and anger, just don't ever bring it to the surface. You're allowed to maybe have an affair, but just be discreet about it. And the idea is those are acceptably unacceptable practices. As long as you don't talk about them, it's fine. But when you bring them to the surface, the crisis arises. And the relationship either has to break and go, listen, you know what? This is a disaster. This isn't working. We're going to go our separate ways. Or the two people have to go, we have to find a new way of relating, right? Either through mediation or just a different way of being in relationship. But the system can no longer remain the same. But the problem is that relationship could continue for 10, 20 years like that. What happens is that the crisis is avoided, but in a sense it remains, and it comes out in various ways. So maybe the guy works obsessively, or the woman starts to take painkillers or alcohol, or the children start acting up in school. It comes up, the crisis comes up to the surface, but when it's not directly expressed, it's indirectly and destructively brought out, right? So what we looked at the other night is the idea of the role of the prophet, in a sense, is to go, what are the rotting bones in the church system, in the political system, and how do we bring them to the surface? And this is always incredibly dangerous. And we looked at, Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, and the idea of bringing up to the surface what we all know, but we don't want to know that we know. The stuff that we're all aware of, but we don't want to be aware of. We try to hide from ourselves. That's the scary thing. And when a prophet does that, we want to kill them. We want to get rid of them. We want to pay them off. In a religious setting, I mentioned we do a thing called the Omega course, where it's 12 weeks. It's like the Alpha course in reverse, exiting toxic religion or Christianity in 12 weeks. And like the Omega course, we do theological topics. And, it might be resurrection or historical Jesus, all of that. And we use living the question sometimes as the debate starter. Unlike Alpha course, we don't finish it with the correct answer. It's about the discussion. It's about being in that antagonistic space together, right? Learning from each other, hopefully, and also thinking through our own positions. But I mentioned last night about the woman who was an elder, and she had these doubts about she was in an evangelical church, a charismatic church, doubts about the literal resurrection. And she was freaking out because she said, if I talked about these doubts, I'd be kicked out of not kicked out of the church, but kicked off the eldership team and the leadership team and the worship team, right? And then I talked about how, well, in a sense, then she said, well, I suppose other people have the same doubts that I do in the church. So the problem is not having the doubts, it's expressing them. That is the acceptably unacceptable transgression, is having the doubts but not talking about it. And the unacceptable transgression is bringing them to the surface. Let's all play a game that none of us believe in. There's a wee story from Belfast where the British Army come over during the Troubles, and they some of them are sent to 5 Mile Town. It's a little place in the middle of nowhere. And at the end of the night, there's nothing to do. And the sergeant says, listen, I'll show you a trick you can play on the Irish. show you how dumb they are, right? So brings out the squad. They go to the local pub, they sit down, and the sergeant takes out an old crumpled £5 note. Dirty old £5 note, puts it on the table, and then takes out a £1 coin, shines it up on his, on his leg, puts it down. Then he looks around for the drunkest Irish guy in the bar, which is hard to find, They're all looking pretty worse for wear, but there's Seamus in the corner, and he's like, okay, Seamus, I know you. Come on, come here. So Seamus comes over, and the army guy says, what would you rather have, Seamus, this old crumpled note or this bright, shiny coin? And Seamus looks and goes, oh, mister, I'll take the bright, shiny coin. Takes the coin and walks off, and then the soldiers all laugh about this, and they play this game with the other Irish, and kind of goes on. Eventually they leave, but there's an American there, not part of the game, and she's aghast by what she's seen. And she goes up to the guys at the bar and says, do you not know that the £5 note is worth 5 times more than the £1 coin? And of course Seamus says, yes, but if we took the £5 note, they'd stop playing the game. All right? Not as dumb as we look, right? But this structure is kind of what goes on in lots of churches, is like the people on the front, the stage, they don't believe half of it. In fact, in mega churches, the worship team are often hired hands. They don't believe any of it. They're there singing all the songs, all I want is Jesus, which is a complete fabrication, a fantasy. It's not all you want is Jesus. You want to go to Starbucks and see your mates after, whatever. So it's a fantasy that's being played out. And then the pastor is preaching and doesn't really believe half of it and has questions about it, all that. But they're acting, and then all the congregation are pretending that they believe it too. And they have their doubts and they're unknowing, and we're all playing a game that potentially you can have a church where nobody believes, and yet it still functions. It's like being in a nightclub at 2 o'clock in the morning. Being in a nightclub at 2 o'clock in the morning, everyone's having fun, drinking, dancing, kissing, all this music blasting. But you wonder, if you just turned the music off, turned the lights up, and everyone had to look at each other for 30 seconds, we'd all be crying, It's like there's a despair going on in the nightclub, but there's a false belief. We're all pretending. Who are we pretending to? It's the pretense continues, and the pretense is there for a psychological reason. It's a defense. It does something in the same way in a church. All pretending to believe gives a psychological pleasure, right? I have been in communities where the pastor has not played the game and said, you know what, I have as many doubts or more doubts than you, right? Because I've been in this longer. In fact, it's always the leaders who have more doubts generally than the congregation, because they're in the center. And they know the center doesn't hold. Like when I first was involved in a church, I was on the edges, and I thought if I got to the center, things would be better then. It's tough here, but if I prayed more and worshiped more and got on the leadership team, did this, it would be like cappuccinos with Jesus in the back office, and it would be amazing. The choirs of angels would sing. And I did everything, and I got to the center, and the center didn't hold. It was just the same. But now I was in the middle, which is the most cynical place, because now you're stuck and people have jobs, they're getting money, they're getting pensions. And so it can actually be the worst place to be in a church that has that kind of idea. So there's this pretense goes on, and then a minister gets up maybe and says, and calls it out, pulls back the curtain and says, I've got difficult relationships as well. I have doubts and unknowing as well. Now, in a healthy community, generally a healthy community, that will be acceptable. You'll be able to go, yep, that makes sense, that's fine, whatever. If the community reacts, in kind of surprise, well, that just shows it's probably quite a young and naive community. Oh, wow, I didn't know the minister had doubts. But if the community acts in anger and fires them, and that happens, believe me, you'll probably know that yourselves, but I've seen it myself. You have to wonder what's going on, because why are they angry? It's the same thing as if I say to someone, I think your wife's having an affair. And if they get really angry with me and they want to kick me out of the house and say, I never want to see you again. It's like, oh, you already know, right? You just don't want to know that you know. If they're surprised and shocked and they sit down, what? That's different. But if they're angry, you're confronting them with something that deep down they're dimly aware of but haven't been able to bring to the surface. And so their reaction to you is a way of defending themselves against that unpleasant, horrific truth that ultimately they're going to have to look at. And so that structure happens. And part of the role for me of the church is to try and get people to a point where they can embrace that doubt and that unknowing and express that in themselves so that it becomes, but that's traumatic. That's difficult. Anyone who hasn't experienced the trauma of that, I would say there's probably something going on that's protecting you. Because it is difficult to embrace genuine doubt and unknowing. It's not some middle-class musing. It rocks us at our core. So anyway, that was like a brief summary of what we were looking at last night. But this gets to the kind of the message of radical theology in some ways, is that there's actually an Islamic parable of a woman who carried with her fire and water wherever she went. The water was to extinguish hell, and the fire was to consume heaven, so that she would do the good for neither reward in heaven or fear of hell. You know, she would learn to live in the earth, right? And there's a story as well from Belfast, which I think gets at this, which I really like. It's during the Troubles. Troubles are great for creating jokes, right? The jokes come out of the worst situations, and there's some good jokes from Northern Ireland. But one of them is that, the IRA were known for planting incendiary devices, and then they would phone up the police, and they would say, there's a device in Marks and Spencer's, everyone's got 5 minutes to get out, or 10 minutes to get out, or whatever. And this was something that was a regular occurrence. So there's a story that one day this guy dies, and he goes up to heaven, up to the pearly gates, and he's waiting there, and St. Peter comes out, and he's like, "What are you doing here, Seamus?" He says, "You're in the IRA." He says, "This is the book of life. Your name's not in it. Your name's not in it. You're not getting in." And Seamus, of course, says, "Oh, you don't understand." He says, "I'm not trying to get in. You got 5 minutes to get out," right? That, in a nutshell, is I think the message of a radical theology is actually heaven is, as we looked at yesterday, as a form of hell. The more someone promises you heaven, this drug, this money, this partner, this religion will make everything complete, will take away your lack and your brokenness, and will wipe away every tear. The more someone promises you heaven, the more there is hell to pay. And the radical theologian wants to make the absolute homeless in heaven so that the absolute is found in the earth, amongst us, in our relationships, in our lives, in our attempts to love and look out for our neighbour. That's the radical move, not kind of going into heaven, but somehow getting the absolute to earth, which is, in one sense, the very story of Christ coming into the earth. For God so loved the world, this materialist and material Christianity, a Christianity that loves material stuff, the world, people, causes, and wants to see transformation here and now. So what we do and what we need to do, in a sense, is find out the places in our lives and in our communities where we will refuse to do that, refuse to embrace the difficulties and the struggles of life, the things that we construct around us, that protect us, the fortresses we build. These are often good, and we talked about this a little bit last night, and I was chatting with Sam about this, and he was drawing out how, this can't always be bad. It's not always bad to have defenses, to kind of, we don't always want to be digging into this difficult stuff. And of course that's true, absolutely. But when these walls become so strong, it means that we become emotionally very repressed, and it might mean that we can't have good relationships, that we start to repress and oppress other people, that we start to have violent tendencies towards other communities. You see it coming out, and when that happens, there's a problem. The symptoms that we have and a community has, like a church, for example, where there's profound anger or bitterness at atheists, or that reject kind of like the latest scientific research on climate change or something like that, when it looks like that's not a reasonable position, you go, that is probably a symptom of a crisis that's not being addressed. It's a crisis of something that's not being addressed. And the thing is, the symptom is always that which we deny. There's one very quick story, but a guy, big, tough guy, walks into this bar, big, huge guy, and he says, I'm looking for Paddy O'Connell. Looking for Paddy O'Connell. And this guy at the end of the bar looks up, looks him in the eye, startled. So this big guy goes up to him, punches him in the face, and gives him a massive kick, throws him off the stool, and starts to walk out the bar. And as he's walking out the bar, he hears somebody giggling. like, well, he's giggling. Turns around, and the guy he's just punched is like just stifling a laugh. He goes, "Oh, you find that funny, do you?" Right? So he walks up to him, grabs him, hits him around again, throws him across the bar. Now this guy's like laughing hysterically. He's like laughing so hard, and goes like, "What? You find this funny?" And he beats him up until he's exhausted. This big guy's exhausted, and he just goes, "Forget it," walks off. The barman's like, he says, "Why are you laughing?" And he says, "The guy's an idiot." He says, "He thinks I'm Paddy." He says, "I'm Seamus." Right? Now, this is the thing about the symptom. We deny the symptom that beats us up. I'm not that. But it doesn't matter if you deny it. You're still getting beaten up by it. It's still destroying you. And the symptom's very... We're not proud. We're not arrogant. We're not this. We're not that. That's not us. But it's still beating us up. It's destructive. And we actually construct entire belief systems to prevent us from seeing it, from protecting ourselves from it. But it still is destructive. And we're very good at seeing it in other people. We're very difficult at seeing it in ourselves. So, for example, I can see it in fundamentalism very easily. I can see how they don't generally go with the best scientific evidence on a certain situation. You can see how it's politically and religiously motivated. But there's occasions whenever I come across something, and maybe if I read an article and it questions human involvement in climate change, I know that I would probably react really negatively, even if it was a well-researched piece of documentation. Now, there's probably good reasons for that. One is, okay, it would still be one piece of research as compared to hundreds and thousands of pieces of research. But if I'm reacting against that, I have to ask, am I also very subjectively involved in a certain position? And I'm not prepared to kind of question that to some extent. And this happens a lot in all of us. I mean, I'm one of the most objective people I know. He's a total calculating machine, and he made a lot of money in the markets because he just looks at things objectively. But he is a Republican, American Republican. Now, not a moral Republican, a fiscal Republican. And even though this guy is the most objective person I know I've ever met, it's hard not to think that his political positioning is connected with his success and what he did. And so, but it's hard for him to see that. But in the same sense, it's hard for me to see how what I believe is connected to my moral positioning. And in debates in America, if you're the Republicans and you're the Democrats, the idea is the Democrats want the Republicans to become Democrat, and you want them to become Republican. And you have the arguments, and you try and rationalize, and you try and show. And the problem is, you think of yourselves in a whitewashed way, and they see some rotting bones. And they see themselves in a whitewashed way, and they see your rotting bones. So it always feels like you're talking at cross purposes from each other. But what's more interesting, and by the way, nothing ever changes. Very few people, except the ones in the middle, maybe move to one side or the other. But what becomes more interesting is if the Democrats say, okay, you're probably not going to make us Republicans, but you might help us see something in ourselves that will make us better Democrats. Because we can't understand why you wouldn't be Democrats. We're for the poor and the oppressed. We're for the person who's suffering, the outcast. How could you not want to affirm that? But then you maybe see something in the other and you go, oh yeah, okay, so, there is something about, I don't know, responsibility and I don't know. It's hard for me to say because I'm probably so far here. I'm a perfect example of this, right? But to listen. And by the way, I had this because for 3 years I lived on the property in a guest house of someone who is Republican who was my patron for 3 years. He said, I want to support you for 3 years to do this work. What I'm doing right now to do this work. 3 years, I'm going to pay for everything. Everything. What do I have to do? Nothing. I'm going like, well, I'm worried because if I take your money, you probably will want to have an influence on what I'm doing. Or whatever. No, doesn't matter in the slightest. Take it as back pay for the work you've already done. That's it. And then a lot of nights for those 3 years, we would sit on his porch. I would drink his expensive red wine, and we would talk about socialism and capitalism and all of these things. And I learnt an awful lot about this is not the enemy in a sense. This is a person who's actually really cares and spends millions building schools for people who are socially disadvantaged. And he learned something because he always thought, oh, those kind of crazy European leftists, they're all just lazy and you know, they're not up for responsibility and all of that. And he was changed. And actually he gave, I'm sorry I'm going off on a tangent, but it's important, but he gave a talk at a little 5-minute introduction to me, best introduction I've ever had, where he said, oh, you know, it was to a book launch that I was doing. And he said, I want to tell you a parable, because Pete likes telling stories and parables. Parables about this wealthy business guy who, you know, Republican, and, you know, believes in taking responsibility and believes in, you know, like, you know, helping your fellow person, but, you know, the government should stay out of things and, you know, individuals, all of that. And then he brought some crazy leprechaun-sized, you know, crazy leftist or whatever to live with him for a few years. And he realized that enemy is not, that two-dimensional character I created is not a two-dimensional character. And he said, am I now kind of some crazy leftist or Democrat or anything? I said, no, I'm not. But am I a better Republican? Yes. Yes, I am. It was quite really moving, you know. And in the same sense, the Republicans say, you're probably not going to make us Democrats, but hey, speak into us and let us see something about our rotting bones that we can't see. The debate changes, and actually everything changes. Things start to move. It was the Republican Party who were the original kind of like against slavery in America. You know, things change and things can change when we become open to the other, and letting the other expose us, because our own symptoms are so hard for us to see. Our own symptoms are so hard for us to see. You know, I want to say one more brief thing about that. I use the example of a community where it's obvious that they don't go along with the best research, so it's very easy for us to go, fundamentals, you know, here's great biblical research, here's great stuff about historical Jesus, all of that, you know, how can you kind of really disagree with this, right? Why are you not going on with this? Why are you not doing this? And it's obvious that it's doing something. It's a defense mechanism. I was a 6-day creationist, right? This is like a confession. My name is Peter, and I was a 6-day creationist, right? And I was full-on 6-day creation, right? I read all the books, and I had all the arguments. You know, why was there only that much dust on the moon? It should have been a lot of dust if it was really old. Why is the sun that size? It would have been massive and consumed the earth if it had been millions of years old. All these arguments. And I knew them all, and I would argue with people who knew infinitely more about science than I did as a 17-year-old. I would argue black and blue. And they never had any influence on me. Never once was I in any way convinced by any of the arguments they gave. I had my arguments down until this guy who I respect, an elder in my church, actually said to me, after listening to me talk about creationism for ages, he just said, oh yeah, he says, you know, I just don't think that's that important an issue. And suddenly, everything just collapsed. The whole edifice fell apart, right? I mean, so you're going like, why? I'm talking to scientists who can't convince me about creation and evolution and all that. And someone just says, I just don't think it's that important. It was like, I already knew it was all crap, right? I just didn't want to know that I knew it because I thought I had to hold on to it. It was doing something. And that's what's really important in actually arguments. And you see this in Jesus and stuff as well. Is whenever someone asks a question, often we're tempted to engage at that level. But what's more important is, you know, where's the question coming from? What's it doing? What's the knowledge? What's happening? Because something that looks like, oh my goodness, that person will never change. I read everything on 6-day creationism. That's never going to change instantly in that moment. Now it can be called an intervention. It was the right thing said at the right time. It only happens occasionally that can occur. But that helped me see something. But the other side of it is really interesting, is we could be, and you could be into, like, I just like to go where the evidence takes me. I like to think about philosophy or theology or mathematics or something like that, and that's a good thing. But you could be doing that because it's a defense against, say, for example, mourning someone that you lost that you love. So even though it's good that you're doing it, and so of course you can hold on to it and go, well, this is good. I'm not like that. I'm not like that. I'm like this. You could go, oh my goodness, I've given myself, and by the way, I'm kind of talking about myself here. You know how I've used philosophy, I think? I'm doing this in order to protect myself from something unpleasant in my own life. And it's even harder to see because it's good. It's a good thing. And that's fine, but if it prevents me from being able to have other emotionally rich relationships, if it prevents me from being able to be with other people, then I want to begin to work that through. And hopefully still enjoy philosophy and theology and all of that, but not to the extent that it's a protection. And the key then is this, is it's not that we get the right answer or that we get it. We have to then ask in our own community here, in PCN or whatever, okay, how does our stuff function? In good and in bad. And how do we bring the repressed up? And you can't do that directly. Kierkegaard talks about indirect communication. We could talk about this a lot. I don't want to, but two things. One is I can't talk directly about your issues because I don't know them. And it's arrogant to think that I do. I don't. In analysis, the analyst has to be very careful to not think that they understand the analysand. Even if they've been doing it for 30 or 40 years and suddenly fall into that, yes, I know what your problem is. They've got to avoid that because that can cause all manner of problems. I don't know your ghosts, the ghosts of your community. I can help you. We together, because you don't even know them yourself, that's the problem, but together over time with the right art and music and liturgy and sermons and prayers, with the right use of these tools, that stuff can gradually come to the surface and can be worked out. But it's indirect. If I see you argue with your mum or something like that, and I go, you're an idiot. Look how you're treating your mum. You're awful. Right? You'll be like, no, I'm not. You don't know what she's like. She's mustard. She's awful. Like, I've lived with her for years. She's neurotic and crazy and controlling. And, she deserved it. She deserved it. But if instead I buy you a drink at the bar, and I talk to you for an hour, and I go, you seem a bit stressed. What's going on? You're more likely to go, yeah, I am. And you know what? I really took it out on my mum. I feel really bad. I should give her a call, right? The direct approach just raises your heckles. The wall comes up. Of course it does. I don't want you to come and tell me all the problems that you see in me. I mean, I'm perfect. I don't understand why I'm not the type of person that someone would like to introduce to their parents. Like, what? I'm completely normal looking. But I don't want someone to kind of say it directly, but indirect communication. And that's why music and art is so important. And comedy. What does a comedian do? A comedian gets you to laugh at something. And then you realize you're laughing at yourself. You're laughing at them. They're telling you about some humiliating experience that happened. And then you kind of you're laughing because you relate to it. It's like, oh yeah, that's me. Oscar Wilde said, if you want to tell someone the truth, make them laugh. Otherwise, they'll kill you, right? And that's it. So, the truth is too much to bear. The face of the truth will burn you to pieces. You cannot face the truth and live directly. You have to see the backside of the truth. You have to be behind a cleft of a rock so that its full brilliance doesn't burn you to pieces. And in order to do that, then we go and hear a singer-songwriter. A singer-songwriter sings music. And we listen to the music and we kind of connect with it. We connect with that person's suffering. That's what great artists do. I think generally a great artist is someone who is so dysfunctional that they're very connected with their demons and their ghosts. It's a terrible thing. I feel sorry for them, but are so connected that they bring it to the surface. And also the gift, is they put that into artistic form. And one of the quotes I love of Kierkegaard, I use it a lot, is where he says, what is a poet? A poet is someone whose lips are so formed that when they scream in agony, great music is formed. And so when we say to the poet, sing to us again, we say, may new disasters befall you. So the poet not only feels deeply, but their lips are so formed that that when they scream and cry, it creates prose and poetry, and it's beautiful. And it allows us to connect with those elements in our own lives. And gradually to mourn and to become healthy. The other option, of course, is we go out and we listen to pop music and we go out and we get drunk. That's also a way of coping with difficulties. But the problem with that is nothing goes away. So the next day you wake up and it's just as bad as it was. During the Depression, the Great Depression, musicals became huge in the cinema. Everyone loved to go and see a musical because you escaped your suffering for a couple of hours and you saw this grandiose spectacle. But you came out and everything was just the same as before. And that was Marx's critique of religion. He said, religion can often, create a beautiful dream that helps you, escape your mundane reality for a few hours. You look at these Christian conferences like that are put on, where I saw one and the tagline was making ordinary men into extraordinary, taking ordinary guys and making them extraordinary men. Right, so it was a men's weekend. And I know what those are like. I've been involved in them. It's beating drums naked in forests and all that stuff, And you come home thinking you're a warrior for Christ, right? Like, I'm going to break down the strongholds. And then you have to make your sandwiches and go to your crappy job, right? And it's like, it's so deflating. So deflating. And then, so what you have to do, you have to go back again and again and again and again and go to all of these things. When really, potentially, the more courageous thing is taking people who think they're extraordinary men and helping them realize and accept and bear the reality that they're ordinary guys, right? That seems like a much more courageous move to me, a much more difficult move, but a much more healthy one. Because we want, obviously, what we talked about yesterday, the superego, the ideal of ourselves. We want to be that warrior, So what was I saying? Where was I? You're going to have to help me. Sometimes I kind of get a little bit confused. Brain isn't what it used to be. What was I talking about? It also tests to see if you were listening. The symptom, indirect communication. Thank you. Look, there's one person listening. Hey, indirect communication. Yeah. So that you either go get drunk and escape your brokenness, but it comes back and you have to go again and again. Or like the Irish pub, you go and you have a drink and you talk about your issues. Or you go to a singer-songwriter, or you do whatever, that there's either the working through or the escaping of. And the church liturgy will always be, people will use the same thing in different ways, but often I think what we're trying to do is ask ourselves, is our church service, are our rituals, are our liturgies becoming a way of escaping our brokenness and life and all its complexity, or is it a way of entering more fully into that and helping to bear it? And I'll give you an example. As an example for you liberals, right? You progressives. Right? Often within the progressive church, there's a real acceptance of doubt, unknowing, ambiguity. Maybe God's there, maybe God's not. I don't even know how to program the VCR player. How am I going to know if God's there? Life is difficult. There's an acceptance of all of these things, absolutely. Whereas often in other communities, that's repressed. That's there, but it's repressed. Right? But you've got to ask, but is that reflected in the liturgy itself? Because sometimes I don't need to be a fundamentalist because the liturgy is fundamentalist on my behalf, right? It's a security blanket. It's the mother who doesn't believe in the tooth fairy, but as long as their child believes in the tooth fairy, they don't feel the psychological trauma of the belief that they have. So when the child stops believing in the tooth fairy, the mother experiences a little bit of trauma. Because although they didn't believe in the tooth fairy, they had a security blanket that allowed them to get the psychological pleasure of the belief that they don't have. What would be interesting to me is, and I know it's in the progressive and liberal tradition, definitely they're there, but I would love to see that, really brought out in deeper ways, that we use the full range of the Psalms, for example, where there is anger and bitterness and frustration as much as there is joy and hope and love. That we create a space where people can liturgically enact the doubts and the unknowing and put that into some sort of form so that we better encounter it in ourselves. One example that we did in Icon, and I'm going to do a talk about Icon later, but it was a thing called Sins of the Father, where it was just in a little bar late at night in Belfast, and you went into the bar, and there was music playing, and there were these words saying, when I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was in prison, did you visit me? And so this is going on. And then it started with somebody coming up and saying, in the last days, humanity stand before the judgment seat. Stand before God. The book of life is opened, and the people look to see if God's name is written. And they say in one voice, where were you when I was hungry? Where were you when I was thirsty? Where were you when I was in prison? And then that night, we asked people to write down times where they felt God had sinned against them. And we had like about 100 wine glasses around the room, broken wine glasses, so smashed wine glasses. And we took these things that people had written on little fragments of paper, and we read them if they weren't X'd. And every time we read them, we just poured red wine into a broken wine glass, so the wine kind of spilled over. What does it mean? I have no idea. It just looked good, right? And we set fire to these, but fire not to get rid of them, fire to send the aroma up to the heavens to say. So we said, these are our frustrations and angers. This is this is you on trial. We are your judge here. And they went up, and then we read something from Job, and we read something from a book called Yossel Rachhover Talks to God, a beautiful post-Holocaust theology book, fiction. Now, the idea is you go like, well, that's the last thing you should do in church, would be, the first unthinking thing you'd think. The last thing you do in church is to say, this is where you sinned against me. This is where I'm pissed off with you, right? And by the way, you go like, well, what about people who didn't believe in God who were in the room? So that doesn't matter, right? In Belfast, everyone believes in God, whether you believe in God or not, right? There's an old English aphorism, which is great. It says, there was once an Englishman who was so brave. Not only did he not believe in ghosts, he wasn't even afraid of them, right? That's really interesting. That's it. That's the psychoanalytic insight. Is that you don't believe in ghosts, but you're still afraid of them. I know lots of people because a lot of my work is about helping deprogram people and unpick people who feel themselves in oppressive situations, and they go, I don't believe in God. I still think God's going to beat me over the head, right, when I die. So it's like it's still in there. Or I don't believe, in hell, but I still think I might go there. Right, that we don't necessarily believe. That's why there's the old story about Seamus going to the pub, right? And he always ordered 5 pints of beer. Barman never asked a question, just pouring them. But anyway, one week he comes in, he orders 4 pints. The barman says, why, Seamus, are you ordering 4 pints? And why do you always order 5 pints? What's going on? He says, it's just I've got 3 brothers and a father, and they're all in different parts of the world, all doing their own thing. So he says, every Saturday night, I have 5 pints of beer, 1 for me, 1 for my father, and 1 for each of my brothers. But he said, recently my father passed away, so it's now my pint and the pint of my 3 brothers. I said, oh, that's a beautiful ritual, beautiful Irish ritual. Well done, that's good. But then anyway, a few months pass, and Seamus comes in, he orders 3 pints of Guinness. And the barman goes like, I don't mean to pry, Seamus, it's not my business or anything like that, but just something happened to one of your brothers. And Seamus is like, oh, no, he says, doctor's orders, I've had to stop drinking, right? Now, is it you don't necessarily believe in the thing, but you're still enacting it in your being, I know that money won't make me happy, but I still act as if it does. I still know. It's a cycle. I think it's like, I know that. But somehow I don't know it that I know it. Somehow it's still making an impact in me and on me. Why was I saying that? Come on. You've had your turn. Somebody else. Where was I? Sins of the Father, thank you. There's good. We're going to get through this together, I promise, right? And I do need to stop. And I've got 15 more minutes. Bad luck. We didn't get onto the really meaty part yet. Anyway, sins of the Father. So that's the thing, is the place where you bring it up to the surface. And why do people walk away from that and think, oh my goodness, now I hate God? No, you're bringing up what's already there. People didn't have to struggle with that. Oh, what will I say? The things were incredible. She left me for someone else. I never recovered. The person I love most is dying of cancer. I lost my child. My only child. I can't have a child. Whoa, that's in this room. But somehow just bringing it up to the surface and having it there felt like a profound act of fidelity, a profound act of something actually deeply faithful, and deeply healing, and deeply something that should be part of our tradition. There's a friend of mine who wrote an album called Hymns to Swear By, and I wish I'd brought some. It's a beautiful album. He's a poet from Belfast, and he's actually becoming a very well-established poet, a guy called Pádraig Ó Tuama. And he's finishing his third book now, and he's also a singer-songwriter. And Hymns to Swear By is a stunning set of poems and songs, beautifully sung, very kind of Irishy kind of thing. But one of the songs is from Jeremiah, and it's called Maranatha. And it's absolutely beautiful. Has anybody got Insurrection sitting there? I think I'm going to try and remember the lyrics. It's from Jeremiah. It says, "You're my strength, but I am weak. You're my strength, but I am weak. You're my strength, but I am weak." Somebody has actually got it here, so I'm going to thank you so much. Maranatha, Maranatha, Maranatha. I've given up sometimes when I've been tired. I've given up sometimes when I've been tired. I've given up sometimes when I've been tired. Does it move you? Does it move you? Does it move you? I curse the day when I received the light. Curse the day when I received the light, when you deceived me, when you deceived me. I've fucked it up so many times. I've fucked it up so many times. I've fucked it up so many times. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. I found my home in Babylon. I found my home in Babylon. I found my home in Babylon, in exile, in exile, in exile. Now, that song, I had a friend, Vince, sing that song after I'd spoken at this thing. And my talk was not that great, and I was kind of wasn't good, whatever. But then he sang that song with his partner at the time. And at the end, you couldn't hear a pin drop. This is mostly kind of an evangelical conference, maybe 300 people. I don't know. It's quite a large number of people, you know. You could hear a pin drop, and then the person got up at the end to let everybody go. And this guy gets up, a Quaker, so which is kind of in light of what he said, you can work out why he was a Quaker. But he said, "Don't speak." He said, "Listen. Can you not hear?" And then, you know, that was the first time I actually started listened, and I could hear people crying around the room, maybe 5 or 6 people crying. And so the guy sat down, and we just all sat there for another 3 or 4 minutes before, you know, eventually people started moving. And it was like, you know, nobody'd heard a song like that in their church, and that they needed it, that it expressed something of their struggles, that it didn't make you feel something. You know, that I can't make you feel something you're not feeling, but I can maybe help through indirect communication to draw out how you're feeling but what you're hiding. And that song began to do that, and I hope in a way that was beginning to reveal. That's where I think the liturgy can begin to change, as I said. And, you know, instead of the prayer that says, you know, "God, I care about the children in Africa," right? What about a prayer that says, "God, I don't care about the children in Africa"? I'd like to pretend I did. I'd like to say that, because that makes me feel good. I love to have an image of myself as somebody who cares about the kids in Africa, but the truth is, God, I don't. Well, imagine prayer that was actually about the deepest moans and groans of your being coming up to the surface. Not your ideal false narrative, the story you tell yourself about yourself. "Oh, I love my parents." "Oh, great. When was the last time you called them?" "Oh, about 6 months ago." Okay. I think that might be a false narrative that's hiding the fact that you've got an issue with them. There's something that you're not dealing with, right? How do we have churches and communities where we can have these difficult prayers? So Bruce Coburn, who you know, great Christian musician, peacemaker, you know, very, very talented, but he wrote "If I Had a Rocket Launcher," and it was about I can't remember where it was. It was somewhere maybe in West Africa, but he talks about if I had a rocket launcher. He's watching these gunships come over the horizon, shooting people. He said, "If I had a rocket launcher, some son of a bitch would die." You go like, this is a peace activist. He's saying, you know, he's talking about, you know, he's saying that, and he talks about, he goes, "Yeah, this is how I'm feeling. You want me to repress that? I will pick up a rocket launcher." Yeah, You know, if you repress and repress and repress, it comes up. He says, I'm saying this, I'm speaking it out. And then he says, and then I'm realizing that the people in those helicopters are conscripted soldiers, 17 years old, some of them, and that they're part of this, and then I'm part of this. But I can only come to know that when I speak it out. And whenever someone says, I want you to leave, they're not saying, I want you to leave. They're often saying, I want you to fight to stay. They don't say what they're saying directly. They say something else. What Bruce Coburn's saying is not, I want a rocket launcher to kill people. He's saying that, in a sense, to get it out so that he can come to a healthier place and maybe be more effective. So in the same way, how can the liturgy kind of begin to do that? Okay, we'll stop there. We'll ask. We've got 5 minutes for like a couple of questions or thoughts, and then we'll break it off, and I'll try and get to what I wanted to say in the next session. Was anybody would like to ask a question or put a thought out? Thanks. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a very simple, it wasn't really even a story, it's a little story, but she carried him everywhere, but the water was to extinguish hell, and the fire to consume heaven. And she said it was because she wanted to do the good, for no other reason than because it's the good. She wanted to live in the world without, desiring, reward from heaven, or without fear of hell, but to somehow live in the world. Oh, okay, I will try it. That's very good. So, what's your name? Sorry. David's a psychologist, and he's asking, he says, there's a lot of interesting things about psychoanalysis, but he would have certain legitimate critiques about psychoanalysis from an empirical perspective. But he's ultimately saying, can psychoanalysis itself become a defense? Can it be integrated into a defense mechanism, become its own problem? I think you're kind of saying that ultimately, I think you're asking whether it's the right tool or a useful tool. I'm wondering if you're replacing one religion with another. Yeah, absolutely. And the answer is, of course, yes. The answer is yes, that psychoanalysis, right, think of it like capitalism. Capitalism can integrate its critique. One of the things that makes capitalism so strong is it always is able to integrate any critique into its system. It's able to integrate its crisis into it. Unlike feudalism, unlike slavery, other issues, capitalism is phenomenally good at taking, there's Marxist critique, let's put it into books and sell it to universities and make lots of money, right? It's a fascinating way of doing that. In the same, and that is exactly an analogy for human beings. We are profoundly good at taking anything that is useful or good for provoking its transformation and integrating it into a system that does the opposite. And actually, I have done this with psychoanalysis. So I was doing a form of what's called Lacanian psychoanalysis. What's fascinating is Lacanian psychoanalysis is quite a provocative type of analysis. But I was having certain issues, or have certain issues with expressing kind of anger. And I was... and there's a certain thing where I sometimes am looking for self-critique or whatever from other people. There's some Lacanian psychoanalysts who don't actually like me in terms of my work, right? And I was kind of discovering that I was actually, the actual psychoanalytic approach I was using was replicating the very thing that I was wanting to solve within the psychoanalytic frame, that I was actually able to use the very tools that would be used to kind of expose certain issues that I had. I was able to integrate that very structure into the ongoing, the system, maintaining homeostasis within my system. So, and the Freudians found this post-World War II, because post-World War II, what happened pre-World War II, people would come in and you say, why did you beat up that person? And they go, I didn't like how they looked, right? And then they would go, okay, well, let's tell me a bit about your anger, your unresolved anger, tell me about your mother, whatever, right? Then post-World War II, someone would come into the analytic setting, and you would go, why did you beat that person up? And they'd go, oh, I've got a terrible relationship with my mother. I've got unresolved anger issues, right? And what's interesting then is there's a psychoanalytic interpretation to the material that's not having an effect. It's been integrated into the system, and it's not actually doing the transformative thing. So the analyst in that situation has to go, stop blaming your mother, right? Or whatever, to provoke the transformation. And so the idea, of course, is, and I thank you for you said this, because I didn't get to it and I wanted to say it, is if I get you to agree with me about this frame that I'm doing in the next few days, it means nothing. Because you might be agreeing with me because you like me, because you're interested in a new thing. Somebody might agree with me because they think I'm interesting. Somebody might disagree with me because they've got a low self-esteem or whatever, and they're trying to build it up by being defensive against me, or they have a low self-esteem and they want me to like them. There's a whole pile of reasons, but you agreeing with me doesn't change anything. If there's a saying about the Americans, which I always like, which is Americans, you got to love them, otherwise they'll bomb you, right? And in a similar way, so somebody can have a belief. This is true. Somebody can have a belief in, say, for example, God loves me, and say you think that's a good belief. God loves me. God loves you. That's a great belief. Because we agree and God loves you, then I don't go any further. But you think God hates you. So I'm like, why do you think God hates you? I'm asking that question. I find out all these things. But I need to do the same with you, because maybe you grew up in a family where your parents said, if you don't love Jesus, you're going to go to hell. If you don't love Jesus, you're not really part of the family, right? But you've repressed that. So you're not really aware of it anymore, but you've still got the belief. But if I just say, oh, the belief is right, you got this belief that, God loves you, but I don't ask where it comes from, that's what's more interesting. Two people do fitness, one because they want to keep fit, the other because they're terrified of dying. The same thing, but with very, very different reasons. So whenever someone agrees with me, it's even more important for me to question it. That's the point where I don't stop questioning. That's the point where, why do you agree with me? Why do you agree with this psychoanalytic stuff? Is this itself a defense mechanism? It's incredibly annoying, because you start going, okay, so everything can be, including psychoanalytic frames. Yes, this is an art. That's why in psychoanalysis they don't do theory. You don't do any of this metapsychology in an analytic session. It's in one sense you leave it and you start to simply try to bring to the surface the unconscious in whatever way you can do it. So the Buddhist parable about the religious guy who ties a cat to a tree during prayers, because this cat's always running around the temple annoying everybody, ties the cat to a tree. Eventually the guy dies, but the disciples continue to tie the cat to the tree during prayer, right? Eventually the cat dies, so they purchase a new cat to tie to the tree during prayers, right? After 7 generations of cat, the tree falls down, so they plant a new tree, they tie the 7th generation of tree. And of course, eventually, the scholars come along and they start to write learned treatises about the symbolic and theological significance of tying cats to trees during prayers. That the very useful, pragmatic thing, and that's why for me, and I think we might actually agree, is a lot of psychoanalysts agree that psychoanalysis is not a science in a similar way to other sciences. It is it's a predictive, it's a way of speaking and trying to categorize loosely certain things that human beings do that provides a certain interpretive schema that might help them overcome symptoms and kind of live a less violent kind of life. So yeah, I don't know if that answered that, but I think it's a really important question. One more, and then from you, and then I know you have to stand up.
I'm concerned about all this Western lifestyle. And as I sit here, if I agree with you, I'm thinking that you're thinking that I want you to like me because I've got self-esteem. And if I don't, if I disagree with you, it's because you're saying something about me that I really know about myself already. And it strikes me that you get in a terrible tangle with all this sort of confusion and intricacies of conversation.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, the key that I keep wanting to come back to is that you only do this if something's not working. Like, I don't come to a community and do this with you. It's only if you want to do it. Like, it's literally only if you don't want to do it, if your life is good, I'm really pleased. I mean, I only work with people who are in oppressive communities, like communities that have those demons. There's analysts are not evangelical, and I don't think we should be. I think that this is a process that someone comes to only because they feel something's not working. So they're there and they do it. But interestingly, what I say is I think it's very ancient. I mean, most of the parables I use are incredibly ancient parables about there's one I didn't tell, which I'll tell later, but I think it's going on in ancient religions. And I think, and that's why I talk about the prophets. I think actually you go right back and you go to Amos, they're bringing up the repressed. I actually think it's a very modern thing. Well, actually, I don't think it's modern. I think there's always these two tendencies, but today in the secular world, I've got a few friends who are secular humanist chaplains. I like it. I like what they're doing, but I keep saying to them, you think you've got you think you've got the right answer. You think you've got, potentially to this point where you're freed from religion, but from a continental philosophy perspective, religion is wherever we are running from our finitude, right? So if it's new drug cultures, new technologies, relationships, money, family, if it's something like that, whatever it is your God, your sovereign God, whatever it is that is preventing you from just living and being and having fun and living in community, and being able to speak your joys and your sufferings, right? That's the thing that needs to be rocked. And Christianity for me is what destroys any sovereignty. Any sovereignty that prevents us from living fully in the earth. But I agree, like this, and you've got to know me. Like I talk about this, but like you maybe think in my life that I'm constantly thinking about my repressions and all of that. No, I did 2 years of analysis in my late 30s because I had a massive worldview, kind of life change, and also because I'm studying it for this type of work. But like, it's not about thinking about this stuff all the time or thinking what do I think you think. It's really only if you feel that in your family or in your community there is splitting, i.e. you're making two-dimensional enemies, or denial, that you keep saying to yourself one thing, I'm happy, and you go like, okay, is that covering something? Idealization, are you putting too much into this thing will make me happy and complete? And these various defenses. If a community is doing that, I think the community requires a little bit of help to unstick. But the point of psychoanalysis, again, is you don't go forever. You really don't. You do it for a couple of years, a few years more if you need to. But if you're doing it too much, the analyst has to ask, are you using psychoanalysis as a protection mechanism? That's why I set up one-year churches. I've set up 3, and when we set up one in LA in January, a one-year community. Because, I don't want you to get addicted to this thing. This is about helping you go through a process of the death of the sovereign God, the God who makes everything right, to experience the God in the midst, and then bugger off and live your life. Have fun. Get married, get divorced, go out and do whatever. Have a laugh. Help your neighbor. Brilliant. But don't get addicted to what I'm doing. Now, I don't think all churches should be 1 year at all, but I think some should. Or 3 years or anything. But so anyway, I really value that. And you and Sam both have the same concerns, and I'm glad you're bringing it up. Otherwise, you wouldn't be pushing me to respond. So that's a good thing to bear in mind. Who wants to live a life where we're constantly in deconstruction? Yeah, that would be horrible. So thank you.